For all of you, thank you for joining us and being part of the speaker series. We are going to continue the speaker series next semester. Actually, in January, we're doing a graduate school focused series. So we're going to have 2 Wednesdays back to back that are focused on the importance or the possibilities of going to graduate school. And one of them is going to be specifically about masters in applied economics. So if you've signed up for the speaker series, you're going to get that information, but you might want to put those on your calendar starting today, since next semester might be a little bit busier or more hectic. The other thing that I want to put on your radar is we are going to have an in-person conference this year. We announced it to the faculty advisors last week, and now we're going to talk to you all, the students, and update you. March 24th and 25th, we will be in Lexington, Kentucky at the University of Kentucky for the Econ Games in-person conference. Fingers crossed, everything stays okay, but we are looking forward to being around everybody, engaged, and build this network of colleagues and students that are interested in economic, the applications of economics. We will be announcing our data collaborator here in the next couple of weeks. We will be also releasing the agenda, so keep an eye on the website. Also keep an eye on the social media accounts, and you can find that at the Econ Games. So with that said, I do want to welcome Dr. Dustin Rumbaugh for today's speaker series. Dr. Rumbaugh is actually part of the faculty advisors for the Econ Games, so we're excited to hear from him. I'm intrigued by the title of his paper, The Impact of American Football on Men's Labor Hours. The question is, are you ready for some football? So I'm looking forward to it. Dr. Rumbaugh is at, as I said, Belmont University. He did earn his Ph.D. in economics from Middle Tennessee State University, and his areas of expertise are in industrial organization and labor economics with an emphasis on economics of education. So Dustin, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to hear your presentation. We try to stop it at around 1 o'clock, so 56 minutes from now. And you have full capabilities of sharing and engaging the community. Thank you for being here.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate the invite and the opportunity to kind of share our paper and maybe talk to some students. I'm happy to answer any kind of questions you may have as we go. I'll have a couple pauses and I'll try to be mindful of observing the chat. But by all means, let me know if you have questions and I'll try to clear things up for you. So let me get sharing and we'll start from here. So the question, as Dr. Alberini had mentioned, are you ready for some football? So there we are. So the overall motivation for this paper, if we kind of take a step back and think about how sports impact our world, there are a lot of papers that explore different elements of this. Some of them revolving around crime. Kaliston Lee in the Journal of Sports Economics as well have found things like increased property crime. Neal and Fromm in a paper on addictive behaviors looked at football games at the University of Texas and found that during higher profile games, students engaged in higher levels of alcohol consumption. I went to undergrad at Ohio State, so I'm kind of familiar with this idea of high profile football games. And I'm not sure if we have anybody from Kent State or any of the smaller schools that Ohio State tends to play, but people kind of get up less for those games. And certainly we see negative behaviors from that. This paper I found interesting. This is, again, just kind of overall impacts of sports. Specifically, these are football papers, but Aaron and Mokan found in the American Economic Journal Applied that there were some impacts on sentencing from juvenile court cases. They found that when a judge was in a state that had an unexpected loss, from a football game, that it increased sentence lengths for some of these juvenile court cases. And they found increased magnitudes if judges actually went to that undergraduate school that lost. So we see that effects from sports, specifically football here, do have kind of other economic impacts in our world. The real motivation for this paper came from my co-author, Luke Petak, and I were mentioning or talking about Bills Mafia. So if any of you are from or Buffalo Bills fans, maybe you're familiar with this, where there's this trend of them destroying tables or just overall being rowdy fans. And so, if you're looking at these pictures, you might be thinking, are Bills fans crazy? Or maybe if you're a Bills fan, you might be thinking, are these people heroes? But, as a labor economist, I'm thinking, are these people going to work in the morning, right? Like, do we see, what are the impacts of this kind of behavior in the labor market? So that was really kind of what started us down this path of kind of thinking about this. So the real question is, how might sports impact our working lives? So we've heard about this to other degrees. There's a consulting firm, Challenger Gray and Christmas, that every year puts out a report on how much March Madness costs employers. Everybody I feel like has done this. Maybe I'm speaking just from personal experience, but that first weekend of games, or that day of games, everybody's watching that first round. And kind of famously or hilariously, I think, we have some of those streaming sites will have a boss button at the bottom corner where you're watching, you're streaming the game, and you click boss button, and all of a sudden it's a fake spreadsheet, so it looks like you're working, right? So but they estimate these kind of losses from March Madness around $13.3 billion. So certainly we see kind of measured work impacts, but we just kind of know that there are certainly work impacts, during March Madness. Also, people have mentioned this kind of idea of Super Bowl fever. Super Bowl fever being kind of akin to cocktail fever that people have the next day, right? Where the morning after the Super Bowl, we see higher levels of absenteeism from work. A lot of people save or take PTO, paid time off, that kind of Monday after Super Bowl Sunday. Again, the night before, they're at parties, they're watching the game, all these other things. So our kind of main question, or the thing that we're concerned with, is how does American football season impact labor market behavior? And just looking at this chart here, this table here, bar chart here, we kind of get at the main idea, or the main measurements we're trying to look at. And the first is what we're going to call a happy hour effect. So if we look at this bar graph here, the blue bars being non-football season, the pink bars being football season, we see that for that Friday during football season, there's a much lower bar for hours worked. Now, this looks only at men here in this case. We'll talk more about that as we go. And then if we look at the kind of second impact here, looking at these Mondays, which we kind of deem a hangover effect, and these are lost labor hours on Monday. So our kind of two main mechanisms, or our two main kind of paths where we see some sort of impact here, are Friday, or what we call happy hour effects, and Monday, which we call hangover effects. Okay, so our estimation strategy, I'm not going to get too deep into the econometrics of it. I'll kind of hit that at a base level, and certainly if you have questions, I'm happy to answer those as we go. But if you're interested, it's obviously in the paper as well. But I'll give you kind of an overview of how we're going to do this. So the first part of this is we're going to use differential timing of football season. So the idea here being the difference between football season and not football season. Now, what we consider football season, we go through a couple different specifications of in the paper, and I'll present different results there as well. But that's our first, what we would call our first difference, right? The difference between football and non-football. The second difference we would use would be the differential timing of games within the week. So thinking about our target days being Friday and Monday. So this is our kind of second difference, if you will, the difference between work behavior on Friday and Monday versus other days of the week. And what this amounts to in kind of, economics or econometric lingo is a basic difference in differences exercise. The first difference being in and out of football season, the second difference being between different days of the week. We're going to remodel this for specific time frames, that is different timings of football season, and some falsification tests for different timings of that as well. We're going to look at, we investigate, at least in the paper, the impacts of Thursday football games and things like that as well. And then we're going to look at different groups of people, men versus women. And we're also going to look at different areas, right? If you live in like a football city, we'll talk about that as well. Any questions about this so far? Thank you. I see that you posted the paper in there as well. That might be helpful if people want some more background on that. And again, I'm happy to offer any kind of detailed explanations, statistically or otherwise, that I maybe don't mention. So the data that we're working with largely comes from the American Time Use Survey. There we go, which is a subset of the current population survey. They started doing the time use survey back in 2003. It's an interesting data set. I'll talk a little bit about it because I think our main audience here is undergrads. And maybe this is just my personal experience working with undergrads and kind of statistics style courses. There are some really good data sets out there that are public. There are lots of observations and have some really interesting data in them. And they're certainly approachable for undergrads, but they're also being used by, your professors and other kind of people doing, academic research. So the American Time Use Survey is one I don't find that students have used a ton. Maybe I just haven't interacted with those students, but it's interesting in that you get a subsection of the current population survey. So because of that, you get a lot of interesting demographic information. But the way the American Time Use Survey works is that one household member is going to complete a 24-hour diary of everything they do throughout the day. So they wake up, when they wake up, they go eat breakfast, they go take a shower, they go, drive to work, they get to work. You get all of those things, but you also get kind of the duration and intensity, or maybe not intensity, the duration of that, and different things they do. Importantly, for our analysis, we get how much they work and when they work. We get whether or not they've attended sporting events. And when we see attendance for sporting events, we see specifically that they attended a football game. You can see if they attended any sporting event you can imagine. A rodeo's in there, right? We get rodeo people. And you get whether or not people are watching TV. Now, you don't get necessarily whether they're watching sports, but you do get TV watching. And I'll mention how maybe we can at least divine out that they're watching football in our cases, though it would be difficult to get exact viewership. I mean, think about the way, you don't know that people are watching Seinfeld reruns versus, a football game. Some additional things to mention with this are our primary estimation samples, about 54,000 people. There are a couple other samples in here that we'll talk about, but we're focused in on men. We'll investigate the impacts on women as well. But mostly we're looking at men here. And since we're looking at labor market behavior here, we're looking at employed men. And we'll take a look at full-time versus part-time in some different sections of the paper as well. Importantly, work behavior, we get the day, the time, the duration of working behavior. And because we have those tie-ins with the current population survey, you can match this up with location data. We know what state they're in. If they're in an MSA, we get the MSA as well that we'll use. Education, racial characteristics, and field of employment. So we can see what industry these people are employed in. But again, it's time use survey is great. There are some complications that I'll kind of mention here in a second as well. Some other kind of data considerations. We had to drop major holidays. If you look at this list of holidays that we dropped, you'll see that most of them fall within the football season. Martin Luther King Day, Veterans Day, Christmas through New Year's, Thanksgiving, and the Friday after, and I think Columbus Day all fall within the football season. And since obviously labor market participation or working on those days is impacted, we just drop all major holidays that could have any impact on labor supply. So we're kind of ignoring holidays. The results that I present here are not going to be, results based on Thanksgiving or Christmas. We've kind of excluded those days to account for that. And again, because the audience here is a lot of undergraduates, not always, not totally, but a lot of you. There were some interesting data puzzles with this paper that I want to point out. One of my favorite parts about doing research is kind of solving these data puzzles. I mean, obviously I like getting results, I like getting answers, I like answering questions, but sometimes I just like to figure out how this data works. And it kind of reminded me of last year's Econ games and one of the practice data sets where we were cleaning, I think it was either FIFA or World Cup data. It was soccer data of some type, or maybe non-American football in the context of the paper. And, to me, those kind of solving those puzzles is fun and interesting. And a couple of the puzzles that we had with this is that after our first submission, we had a referee who wanted not just, kind of the broad football season, but specific information on days and locations of football games. So we pulled the kind of universe of football games, where and when they happened, and we then had to match those up with individuals in MSAs on dates and times. And that was kind of a difficult statistical puzzle to kind of work out. That matching was more difficult than I think we had initially set out for. The time use data has MSA number and things like that. But, when we were just pulling records of game days, the NFL doesn't necessarily put it was in MSA number, 12 or whatever the case may be. And also American Time Use Survey gives activities in minutes and start times. But if you think about how times work, 60 minutes being an hour makes kind of, if somebody worked for 300 minutes, you have to then start converting that to times of days, which becomes kind of an interesting puzzle. So just, think about this when you're doing research, especially as undergrads. Solving sometimes some of these interesting data puzzles in and of themselves can yield good results. Okay, any questions up to this point? Let me see if I can scroll through the chat for just a second, or feel free to just, I think, chime in and I'll do my best.
Dustin, I really appreciate you talking through the challenges of the data and then also tying it to the Econ Games experience, because most of the participants are going to have to see that connection. So thank you for doing that. I don't have any specific questions, but anybody else?
A lot of World Cup talk. We'll see. I wasn't able to go the other night, but USA versus Mexico was in Cincinnati. I don't know if you all got to, but I had some friends that did, and they got back to Nashville at like 3 a.m. But all I have to say is, once again, Dos a Cero, right? I lived in Columbus for a number of years, and that was the mantra there. Favorite football team, I'm from Ohio, so I'm a Cincinnati guy too, for those of you that are in Northern Kentucky. Big Reds fan as well. So yeah, but I'll kind of move along here. So to get to our statistical model, again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I will just explain a little bit of this for those of you that maybe have taken an econometrics course or are interested in doing so in the future. This is our statistical model. This is what a kind of basic difference in differences model would look like. Our outcome variable, our dependent variable, is going to be hours worked by person I on day D in time T, meaning the amount of hours worked. But we're kind of looking differently if you kind of keep track of the subscripts a little bit. If you look at that beta 1 Monday, that is a dichotomous variable for the day of the week. Now I have Monday presented here, but we vary that, right? So that's if we're looking at the hangover effect. If we're looking at the happy hour effect, that would be Friday, or if we're looking at other days of the week, it would be those various days of the week. Football is another dichotomous variable, 1-0, for whether or not you're in the football season. Again, we're going to vary that length of what we define as the football season as well, but that, when we look at that time T variable, that's going to be whether or not you're in the football season. And then Monday times football, that's the interaction, that's that difference in the differences of those two parameters. So that beta 3 coefficient is our coefficient of interest. And when we talk about our results, that's typically what we're looking at in this case. And then additionally, that kind of X superscript T, subscript I, those are individual controls. I mentioned some of those earlier: race, education, occupation, age, location. And then we have a series of time fixed effects. We do day of the week, month, year, month by year, to try to capture any kind of seasonality or kind of day, month of the week effects. So this is the basic statistical model. There's some variation within this of what we use in the paper, but this should at least give you a little bit of an idea of what's going on. And just kind of point out, especially to undergraduates, not to get into a big differences debate, but it can be an approachable model, especially at the undergraduate level, where you can kind of get at some powerful effects, but without doing things that are enormously complex. So our first table of results, and this is kind of our main specification results. Again, these are employed men. And if we're looking at, and I'm mindful of kind of small numbers on a screen, so hopefully you can see these, but the hangover effects that we find are negative and significant, meaning these are, remember, our outcome is labor hours. So what we're seeing here is reduced labor hours. Hangover effect, this is Mondays. So Mondays during football season, we see that men contribute about, I'll just put them all up there. There we go. About 2/3 to 3/4 of an hour of reduced labor. Now, to put this in kind of minute terms, 2/3 of an hour is about 40 minutes. 3/4 of an hour is about 45 minutes. So 40 to 45 minutes reduced labor activity on Mondays after football games in football season. The happy hour effect, that is the Friday reduced labor hours, are a little bit smaller, but still statistically significant, ranging from about a half hour to 2/3 of an hour. So again, about 30 to 40 minutes of reduced labor hours. Just looking at this in the overall kind of table here, or chart here, if you look at the first three columns, excuse me, first three columns, those are without any of those kind of controls or fixed effects. We do see, I guess, a little bit of Friday hours there, but our main specifications are specifications that include all of those controls and time fixed effects here. So these are kind of the results, and we'll show these again throughout the paper as just a point of comparison when we look at different models. Looking at this, these are some results of the same kind of, these are day of the week results. So these, the dots represent those coefficients that you would see in any given day. So if we were to run, just to go back, this previous regression, but with every day of the week, Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we would end up with a chart like this. Now, when we do that, you need a reference day. So if we look at the top reference day, this was what we originally submitted, was Wednesday. the bottom, the reference day is Saturday. A referee suggested, and I think rightfully so, that we add at least a second reference day to show the difference. But the idea here is if you look at those dips for Monday and Friday on each, those are dips in labor market activity, that is hours worked in each of those days. So this is similar to the last table, but kind of a graphical representation of what we're seeing. And we're seeing that accounting for everything else, right? Controlling for those things that we controlled for, age, type of work, racial characteristics, education, all these things, we see that people are contributing fewer labor hours, only statistically significantly on Mondays and Fridays. So this is kind of gives you an idea of the results relative to other days of the week. So that's our kind of main specification. But anytime you kind of go through these things, you have to support your results in some sort of other ways, right? You can't just say, these are our results. You have to kind of explore other possibilities. So we kind of support our results in a couple other ways. We're going to do some placebo testing. We're going to examine what would happen if we did the exact same analysis, but other alternate timeframes, meaning let's just say that, the football season happened in March through March, April, May. Would we still see significant results? If we did see significant results, that would be problematic because it would suggest that maybe it's not actually the football season that's causing this. To put this in kind of diff and diff lingo, this is effectively the parallel trends assumption that we're kind of accounting for here. We're going to look at some kind of alternate season setups. So our main specification only goes through the regular season, but we're going to extend our season through the playoffs as well. We're going to, at least in the paper, we talked about Thursday games. This was a big sticking point for a particular referee. Our time frame goes from, so American Time Use Survey started in 2003. We started collecting data on this in 2018, but only had up to 2017 data available. So we had 2003 to 2017. And if you think about that time frame, Thursday night football games are actually a relatively new thing. I think the first Thursday night football game, or regular Thursday night football game, started in 2009. In those first few seasons that they did it, it was only kind of like 3 or 4 Thursdays throughout the season. Today, we see kind of every week Thursday games, but that's a relatively new thing. Didn't apply to most of our sample, but we did investigate it in the paper. The idea with these kind of extended season is that we should still see effects, but if we think about the effects, we would expect them to be smaller. Now, why would we expect them to be smaller? Well, as you get into playoffs, you have fewer and fewer fan bases that would be engaged in football. Yes, you see more, maybe people are going to watch those games just as much, but, not to pick on Bills fans again, but historically, that's a big fan base that's passionate, but come playoff time, they're no longer involved in those games. So we would expect to see effects, but smaller. And then one other kind of thing that will strengthen our results here is time of day. So if we look at this kind of hangover effect, lost Monday hours, they should be earlier in the day. And if we look at lost Friday hours, they should be later in the day. And that would just at least reinforce the idea that we're seeing, these kind of, as we call them, hangover or happy hour effects. So this first placebo test, again, is presenting the ideas of this alternate football season. So in this case, we put alternate football season as March, April, May. And in the full sample, we see no significant results, which is what we want. We don't want to see results from this kind of alternate placebo timeframe. And then we excluded football season 2, the actual football season during this timeframe, and again, see no significant results. Which is exactly what we want. We don't want to see anything significant in these cases. This is kind of an alternate timeline, and this just shows that it's really the football season that's driving this. Again, extending this season a little bit to playoff season. we see results. So looking at columns 5 through 8, this is if we add in playoffs. Columns 1 through 4 are the same columns we saw from the very first table of results. Same thing there. And we see that still statistically significant, but as we would expect with fewer fan bases involved, the magnitudes are slightly smaller. So you get fewer games during playoff season, fewer fan bases involved. We would expect to see slightly lower numbers, but it's good that they're still statistically significant. If you did maybe like a Houseman test or something, it's going to be right on the borderline of whether or not those results are actually different from one another. But we won't get bogged into that. Time of day. So to kind of reinforce again, the naming conventions we have, the before noon labor activity. So again, we're looking at the same thing. It's just that outcome variable, that hours worked. We're restricting this to hours worked before noon. So this is before noon labor hours, and we see that we have statistically significant effects before noon. So again, negative significant effects on Monday only of before noon work. This again supports the idea of this hangover effect, that it is in fact kind of Monday morning results of football. And our happy hour effect is this kind of afternoon work. And here we do still see some reduction in afternoon work on Mondays. So maybe overall intensity on Monday falls. But we also see some statistically significant effects on Friday of post-noon work hours. Now we cut those post-noon work hours off at 5 too, so we don't see kind of if they're working less Friday night, and that's more just of a consistency issue in our measurements. Any questions or other clarifications of these kind of main results or some of the things that we find early on? Let's see, dollar amount of lost productivity. We'll talk about, we do a back of the envelope calculation at the very end to look at that. That's certainly a lower bound, and I'll mention that toward the end. March Madness, yeah. Okay. Are the hours lost or shifted to the other days? Yeah, so we find, this isn't in the paper because it ends up being a bunch of tables of non-significant results, which in and of itself is important. But we did find that no, they're not really shifting to other days. They're just losing labor hours. Now, we don't break it down by industry. I mean, it's possible that that's for hourly workers. Perhaps they're trying to make up those labor hours somewhere else. Whether or not you can easily vary your schedule in that way is, we can't determine easily. But, if you're on salary or you're a salary employee, maybe you are just kind of showing up late to work those days. Not sure if ATSU or current population or ATUS or current population survey specify whether or not people are in or outside of salaried professions, but you could probably divine a lot of it from occupation codes. So that is an interesting extension. Gig economy, freelance, self-employed as well. Yeah, so I mean, if you're in those kind of more flexible kind of working hours jobs, certainly you could maybe see some push toward later start times on Monday, or kind of however that would fall. That's, again, as you kind of mentioned. Do I think this effect is lessened with remote work? Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be so much that comes out of kind of remote work studies, for labor economists. The question is, how do we control for all the other crazy things that were happening simultaneously? That'll be the big hurdle to jump over. But yeah, I mean, I think remote work allows us to look at alternate ways we do work, right? I mean, before it seems like now we've shifted to a place where we can kind of fit other parts of life in the middle of our workday. I mean, I can speak a little bit from personal experience. I had 2 children at home at the beginning of all this while I was teaching online, and the ability for me to kind of carve out times to, make a box of mac and cheese throughout the day astonished, I think, even me. How did the numbers of COVID shift everything? It's hard to say. It's going to be hard to look at any kind of sports impacts during COVID because the way that, first of all, sports seasons changed significantly, whether or not you could attend games, whether or not some games happened, all kind of varied up significantly. But it'll be interesting to see as time goes on how things were impacted from this. Some flexibility on how to strategize. Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of how you can impact or vary your day changes significantly these results. So yeah. Okay.
I think there's one question asking basically probably a policy implication in terms of what should we do to save the time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So some of the question might be one of the things that, in an ideal world that we could actually measure that we can't in reality is the intensity of work, right? So it's possible that these people are getting just as much done in 6 hours of work on Monday as that they would have been doing in 8 hours of work. It's kind of hard to measure that. Make the Super Bowl national holiday. Yeah, I mean, so it's one of those things where it's really tough to get to that because I think certainly, I mean, I'm not saying that there's not productivity gains or positive gains from this, but one of the things that I miss about coming into the office is kind of talking to colleagues. And I know that sometimes is seen as maybe not productive work, but I think a lot of people would argue against that. The idea from this paper didn't come out of a classroom discussion. It came out of, did you see these crazy fans, which is just kind of water cooler discussion. So, policy implication, it's hard to say. It's hard to say that less work is being done, though, maybe that's the case. It just would depend on industry. I don't know if that completely really answers your question, but it dances around it, I think. Okay. So some other extensions of our model. We're going to look at the labor market impacts on women. We'll find that there are none, but we'll certainly address it. This result I think is actually interesting, and this came out of something Luke was interested in. And this is the kind of variation of during the business cycle. So the MBER said that the Great Recession started in December 2007. I think they have it ending December 2009, though unemployment was above 8 until the end of 2012. So we're going to look at the business cycle. We're going to define the recession as December 07 all the way through December of 2012, and just look at that kind of high level of unemployment and see how this impacts our results too. I think this is a somewhat interesting result. And then we're going to look at different cities, right? Does the impact change if you actually live in an NFL city? So if you live in Cincinnati, does this differ than if you live in, rural Iowa? Iowa fans are still, intense football fans, at least in the Midwest, but maybe you're not in an actual MSA with the city. So differences across gender. Again, those two columns for men are the same specifications we used earlier. So those are the same results we've looked at from before, but we see no statistically significant effects for women. So again, the sample is different. We're looking at just the sample of women in columns 3 and 4, but we see no statistically significant results. Now, this is not to say that women aren't engaged or involved or fans of football. But we just don't see these labor market effects for them. Now, we can kind of look at things surrounding Sunday behavior to maybe at least give us some information as to why this might be the case. So if we look at TV watching behavior using our time use survey data, we find that on Sundays during football season, women watch about 2% more television. Now, 2% more television on Sundays is not much. You could almost say that it's maybe a statistically significant impact, but it's maybe not an economically significant impact. This kind of 2% more TV watching for women equates to about 4 or 5 minutes of more TV for women during football season. So we don't see them necessarily increase the amount of TV watching behavior. We tried to look at whether or not they attend football games more, but if you look at just the kind of sample sizes, 50,000 seems like a lot. But if you look at diary days, right, we get 1 diary day per person. So divide that by 360 to make it a nice round number. And you're looking at maybe only 150 people that might attend any given game. And it just starts to cut the sample a little thin. So we can't really look at behavior of attending football games because not all that many people do it on a national level, but a lot of people watch TV. So we can kind of look at that. Now, if we look at men's TV watching behavior, on Sundays during football season, they watch a lot more TV, right? About a 17% increase in TV watching. Now, we can't say for sure that they're watching football games because we don't get kind of, Nielsen ratings data with this, but we do, again, it would be kind of hard to think of another thing that's happening on Sundays during football season that makes men watch TV at such a higher level. So this kind of suggests why we might see this kind of, set on our phones. Yeah, that's a good thought too. Okay, so this second thing, and I think, again, this is a really interesting result, this business cycle variation. So in periods of recession or just general high levels of unemployment, we would think that workers should be less likely to shirk or be lazy toward work, or just they would exhibit less absenteeism. So again, if kind of jobs are scarce, so should we pay more? I got to stop watching the chat while I'm presenting. So that, yes. So we would think that in periods of recession that workers should be more sensitive to the kind of, scarcity of jobs, if you will. So we would expect that during recessions, workers should be not missing work so much. And that's exactly what we find in columns 3 and 4 there. We see that during recession times, again, we define recession between December 2007 and December 2012, which is a kind of period of time where the unemployment rate remained above 8%. We see that we have no significant effects. But during times of expansion, that is not recession, we see not only do we see negative significant effects, but we see negative significant effects to with slightly larger magnitudes during this business cycle expansion, which I think is an interesting result. This is consistent with kind of what labor market theory should say regarding how people kind of interact with these tighter or looser labor markets, how they've been defined. So I think this is a really kind of interesting result in kind of how we behave during these different periods of time. Looking at this for cities with NFL teams, this is effectively a triple difference model. Remember, our first difference was football season versus not football season. Second difference would be those days of the week variation. And then third difference would be a NFL versus non-NFL cities. If we look at these, we see no significant happy hour effects. So those Friday effects, we don't see any impact in these NFL cities. But if we look at these hangover effects, that is columns 1, 2, and 3, we see that not only are there significant hangover effects, but the magnitudes are much larger than what we see in our other NFL cities. So if we look at these effects, we see that they're mostly driven by the home city. So if you live in a city where a home game just took place, that Monday morning, we see reductions of labor market hours for men of about 120 minutes, 1 hour and 20 minutes less work. And again, driven by home cities. So what about cities like Lexington and non-NFL city, but a large MSA? I'm not going to present it here, but in the paper itself, we do look at just broadly MSAs versus non-MSAs. So if you live in an MSA, and we do see kind of differential effects, but not quite as stark as what we see here. But certainly, take a look at the paper, and we do have those kind of MSA versus non-MSA results in there to Trey's point. Yeah, so the interesting thing with the away, to speak to Dr. Patel's comment there, as this kind of goes on, it will be interesting, and I'll kind of look back on what this looks like for kind of individual MSAs. Because the way it is now, we just don't have a big enough sample of people in an individual MSA to look at the effects of different fan bases. But certainly, I think there are going to be differential impacts. Speaking to kind of travel distance, you wouldn't anticipate someone from Nashville, for example, traveling all the way up to Seattle, right? So you're just going to watch that TV, on TV. But if you're looking at a Browns and Bengals game, right, it's very reasonable to expect somebody from Ohio to travel elsewhere in Ohio. So you would expect at least a priori to see those effects in some games, but not others. And kind of travel distance, I would think, would make an impact on that. So that'll be something certainly interesting to investigate in the future. And maybe an enterprising young undergrad could start taking that on. Yeah. So some kind of ultimate findings and conclusions. American football season reduces Monday labor supply hours for employed males by around 30 to 45 minutes, depending on specifications. We find similar effects, though, again, specification really matters for this, for Friday labor hours. Appears not to be driven by omitted common factors. So that's the idea of those falsification tests that we did throughout the paper. Results, I think this is a really interesting result, that there is variation over the business cycle that is consistent with other common labor market models. So, this kind of contributes to the labor literature broadly, and not just, obviously there's beyond just the sports stuff, but, to the labor literature broadly as well. Again, robust to a lot of different specification tests. To some comments that people had earlier, questions maybe, we did do some back of the envelope kind of lower bound estimations on losses. These are, I'll make the case, super lower bound, and even referees said that we were maybe understating the level of this, but I'm comfortable understating it. If we take the average weekend viewership of NFL games, it hovers around 16 million. Again, there's week to week variation, but average NFL viewership on a given weekend is about 16.5 million viewers. If we said that like half of them are men, which is probably a lower bound given some of the other kind of television watching results, I think it's pretty safe to say that at least half are men. If half that viewership is men, and they lose about call it 6.2 hours of work on Monday during the football season, ignoring Friday altogether, and then multiply that by the median hourly wage for men given by the BLS, that's over $5 billion in lost wages per year. And again, this is kind of a very, very lower bound estimates here, very safe estimates. One of our referees suggested that we actually multiply this by the amount of games and kind of intensity of labor watching. But yes, again, lots of kind of lost labor or wages. Yeah, I guess labor wages too, during the season. So any other kind of questions, clarifications there? I'll unshare my screen there so that we're just kind of looking at each other. But any other kind of thoughts, questions, clarifications, extensions?
Like, just adding to this, I think there was an article about the English soccer fans are pretty passionate about their team, although they always say they're bringing it home, but they never do. And when they went to South Africa for the World Cup, I think they had estimated around $12 billion worth of loss for that summer. And the government was already preparing in terms of what should we do for the next World Cup to ensure that we don't go through this same issue.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting too. I mean, you could look at this in a lot of different ways. So if you look at the World Cup games, first there's going to be a lot more physical travel for extended period of time. You don't fly down to South Africa for the game, right? You're missing significant amounts of labor time. And if you even think about things like March Madness, the kind of timing of games is probably worse for kind of labor productivity. Sunday is at least, you have low levels of work on Sunday. So at least you're kind of getting away with that in kind of college football too. But, with some of these sports that have, or big athletic events that have midweek games, you're likely to see really, really big lost labor hours. Speaking to college a little bit too, one of the initial things that we thought about with this is kind of college football. It's a lot harder to measure that because there are just huge differences in kind of intensity for that. I mean, think of, I've got a lot of UK people probably here. A UK basketball game is a big deal, right? Even a regular season basketball game can be a big deal. You're likely to see much different intensity for that than what you would in, even I'll try the heart. I like it. Even, Middle Tennessee State, which is also a large university with a Division I basketball program that gets into the tournament from time to time. There's just the intensity of the fan base and kind of what it means to that community is different. Same thing. Would I be able to differentiate by areas with rabid fan bases, such as Pittsburgh compared to San Francisco? Maybe. Right now, we just don't have the data for it. The problem is that, you get 16 football games a year, only 8 home games. Well, I guess 17 now, I think, this season, but only 8 home games. And they're just kind of cutting the samples down. You just end up with too small of a sample to differentiate small, kind of sample sizes like that. So it's difficult to do so in an ideal world with an infinite data. Yeah, absolutely. You could get there, but it's just a kind of just the data. You just don't have enough of it, unfortunately. And it's the same kind of story with things like college football. Not only are a lot of large college football programs not in huge statistical areas. You think Alabama is one of the biggest kind of fan bases, but Birmingham's not the biggest MSA in the world. The kind of upside of using the NFL is that those are all, for the most part, the largest MSAs have at least one professional football team. So professional sports kind of lends us a little bit more data flexibility there.
That's a good point. Let's see if there are any questions. There's a question for you on the chat.
Yes, is having an effect on male employment itself? Jobs shortly after. We didn't really go down the road of kind of maybe overall job attrition. We find that if we look at weekly, so if we just kind of combine, instead of, and this is not in the paper, but just having looked through the data, if you look at total working hours during the fall, which coincides with the football season, it seems lower, but most of that's due to major holidays happening in the fall. If you kind of exclude major holidays, we see that on average people work about the same, maybe slightly less in the fall, but I don't think we really saw any kind of labor market attrition, if you will. And I think it'd be hard to measure that a little bit. This is just not speaking to our data in particular, but just thinking of broad labor market implications. You see a lot of seasonal work happening in the kind of late fall season that disappears in after the new year. I'm trying to think. It'd be hard to account for that. So I don't have a great question or answer to that question, Catherine, but it seems as though they're not losing their jobs more. Again, that's not in the paper, but we don't see kind of an overall decrease in employed people or attrition. I guess I'm wondering if there are any consequences for this behavior. I don't know. I think this is probably, I would probably, yeah, not to be Debbie Downer. I don't think so. I think we do have some. I kind of didn't put it in this because I think it's wasn't the right audience for this, but we did make some comments on kind of overall labor elasticity in the paper itself, and about how this maybe contributes, or at least falls within the bounds of some of the conversations around monopsony in labor markets, and whether or not some of these other kind of outside labor market things are involved in this too. But I guess I can't really accurately answer the question if there are kind of broad labor consequences. Intuition tells me probably not, but you know, are there some people on the margins? Probably, but are we going to see huge swaths of problems in the labor market? I doubt it.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about that, and I was thinking that just summarizing the work culture and whether the work has a bracket for March Madness or fantasy points and so on, and that in itself would play its role up here and probably have no consequences, because this probably goes from the supervisor's aspect all the way down and so on. So, but it's a good question and good thing to kind of probably extend the paper in some sense. So you see, Catherine, you're not always a Debbie Downer. She's so positive.
Sure. And I mean, look, I lived in, a lot of you live in Lexington. I lived in Columbus for a number of years. The kind of overall work morale is certainly impacted by how well the Ohio State football team is doing, or how well the Kentucky basketball team is doing, or put in any kind of rabid fan base, if you will. There is a kind of morale boost or hit that revolves around that. And to one of the papers I mentioned at the very beginning, the paper, the AEJ applied paper, where juvenile court judges were increasing sentencing mostly for young Black men. It was problematic, right? That's not good, and there are some real world consequences to some of this. And there are a lot of different ways we can study the way that kind of sports impact our economy, or the economic lives we live. Yes, the Buckeyes, we're doing okay. We've got Michigan State and Michigan. That's going to be a test, and then the Big Ten championship game. We'll see. I'm a little worried, but I'm it's a good worry.
All right, Dustin, this was fantastic. This was a really great presentation, and I just want to make sure we are respectful of people's time as well, because everybody, let's give a virtual applause to Dustin for joining us and presenting this really great paper and really great information. I think I got a lot of ideas to take away from this presentation into my classes, both principal level and upper level. So thank you, Dustin. For everybody who joined us for the speaker series this semester, thank you so much. I wish you the best of luck for this semester, and happy holidays, and we'll see you again for our speaker series next semester. Take care, guys.
Thanks, everyone.